What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're continuing our work here during our off season on the Legend car, and this week I really want to tackle getting our front calipers rebuilt. This video is going to primarily be spent on the Wilwood calipers because that's what we run on this car, and it's also the one we ran on the last car. These are pretty simple calipers. They're just two pistons, one on each side, and the pads slide in and out very easily. There's no difficulty to changing pads. The only problem with these is you have to shim them out on the bracket just to get them centered up on the rotor. But other than that, these calipers are the choice for a lot of people because they give you that even brake pressure on both sides most of the time, and it's a bit more even wear on the pads. Now personally, we've never ran the Toyota calipers on these cars. We've always just run the Wilwoods just because that's what the cars we bought came with. So we had no reason to try and switch back to the Toyota calipers, assuming that these were the better choice. I think that the Toyota calipers are just a single piston caliper and they push in from one side, so it does create that bit of asymmetry, so you're not going to get the even force across on both pads. But I do know that there's a decent bit of people that still run those calipers, so I'm not necessarily trying to ignore you guys. I'm just saying that we only run the Wilwoods and that's all that we've known so far. Now the first thing we got to take care of is getting a majority of our fluid out of our brake reservoir here. And that's just because our reservoir is located towards the top of our firewall, and the way that we're going to have the line zip tied isn't tall enough to stop fluid from leaking out just based on gravity. So we're going to take a bit out and then we can start working on getting these calipers off. Now with our reservoir mostly emptied out, we can go ahead and start working on getting our brake lines off. There's still going to be quite a bit of fluid held inside of here, so you always want to make sure you do this over a rag or over a drain pan. But all you got to do is get your fitting loose enough to start pulling it off. So once you get the brake line off and you know that the fluid in the reservoir isn't higher than where the brake line will end up once it's zip tied, you can go ahead and throw yourself a zip tie right here on the shock tower. Get this as tall as you can and then tighten down the zip tie. And once you get both calipers off of the car, you bring them over here to where we're going to be working. We're going to try and keep our bench top clean, so we've laid down quite a bit, but I just want to mention that there's two main kits that you can get for rebuilding these. We opted to go for just the seals from our dealer because this was only 14 bucks, and it covers both calipers because it comes with 4 seals and there's only 2 pistons in each, so there's only 4 seals there. You could also choose to order the rebuild kit that comes with the seals, the 4 bleeder screws per caliper, some new bridge slides right in there, and new pin here, which we decided not to do because all of our stuff still looks pretty okay and we didn't feel the need that we wanted to triple the money that we're putting into these calipers. So we're just going to sit here and change out just the seals. We're just having the seals soak here in some brake fluid just so that they are lubricated up a little bit and a little bit easier to push in, nothing too special. And then we're gonna grab some compressed air and a little block of wood here. We're gonna try and get our pistons out, so we're gonna try and seal up against the hull as best as we can and just start pushing air in and try and get our pistons to push out a little bit. So this was our left caliper, and you can see here that the piston is actually pushing out quite a bit unevenly. The outside one is pushing out pretty significantly compared to the inside one. So to try and get this inboard piston out here, we're gonna rig up a little bit of a smaller block, and then we'll throw in an old brake pad that we may or may not use in the future. Haven't decided yet, but once that's in there, we're gonna go ahead and try and hook our air back up and see if we can't push that one out. once you got them out enough, you'll be able to pull the whole piston out and hopefully be able to get it with your other hand. Now, it can take a little bit of time and using different things to kind of shim their way out, but eventually you will be able to get them out and you'll be able to have an empty caliper, because now both of our pistons are out from the inside of the caliper. And so all we're going to be doing is replacing those black O-rings in there. We'll get this cleaned up and then start pulling out the old ones and put in some new ones. So once we got most of it cleaned up, go ahead and take a pick that can get into pretty decently small places. We can go ahead and pull out our O-ring seals. You're gonna wanna be careful when doing this, not to scratch up the surface on the inside, that channel where this will live. And then you can go ahead and clean out the cylinder bore so that there's no debris or any additional brake dust or anything that may have gotten in there. So now our caliper is clean, it's dry, and ready for everything new to go back in it. Now we're gonna take some scuffing pads here and we're just gonna polish up the outside race of these pistons, because you wanna make sure that everything is nice and clean. You see all of this grime right here towards the edge. You can see there's a little imprint. So really want to make sure that we can get all of that off. But you want to try and make sure that you're not taking any material away, because this still needs to seal up on the inside of the caliper to prevent any fluid from getting past it. And once you feel like you have it cleaned up pretty decently, you can always hit it with some brake clean and clean it off to make sure that you actually got everything, because I know at least for us, the residue from our gloves is still existent, so it could pop up. There is still a little bit of grime on here, so we're just going to continue cleaning until we get all of that off. And then once it's all off, we'll set that aside, work on the second one. So once you've got your pistons all cleaned up and polished, you can go ahead and fish out one of the new seals that we had soaking in brake fluid. Go ahead and start trying to get those into that channel on the inside. And once you got one of them in, go around to the other side to get the second one in. And then we can go ahead and take our pistons on the back sides here and get those submerged in some brake fluid for a little bit so that they're a little bit easier to put in. And while we're waiting for those to be ready, we can go ahead and get started on the other caliper. So now we've got the other caliper taken apart, but before we start working on that, we're gonna go ahead and reassemble our left front caliper. So what we're gonna do is dip our finger in some of this brake fluid here and lube up our new seal just a tiny bit, and then take one of the pistons that's been sitting in the brake fluid and just try and do your best to get it even. Square it up to the face and then slowly just start pushing it in. And now we're recessed in all the way with a new piston. Now we gotta do the other side. Same thing, lube up the seal and get our piston in there. So now this caliper has both of the pistons inside. It's got brand new seals and it's now ready to go back on the car. And now we'll go ahead and start prepping the right front one. So dump our seals into the brake fluid. Go ahead and pull out our old seals. There's one. Grab the other one. Junk those, and then we can go ahead and start cleaning everything up. So with the right front, you can see a little bit better the acclimation of all that gunk and debris towards the front of the piston. So that's the kind of stuff that we're really aiming to knock down, but also cleaning up the rest of the piston as well, just to make sure it has the best chance on sliding against the seal instead of getting hung up on something. So once the pistons and the caliper are cleaned out, take our new O-rings here that have been soaking in brake fluid, and then go ahead and try and get them into that channel. Go ahead and stick our new pistons in there as well, get those lubricated. And you'll know once the seals are in the channel correctly, because they will be no longer on top of the surface and they won't be all bunched up or anything like that. So now that we have those in there, we can go ahead and lube up our seals, get our cylinders back in. And same thing on the other side. Lube up our seal and push in our piston. Once everything's in, give the caliper one last spray down so that when you go to put it back on, you're not going to get brake fluid everywhere. And now it's ready to go back on the car. Now one other piece that absolutely needs to be cleaned if you're not going to replace them are these pins right here, these slide pins for the pads. You can see there's a bit of gunk on the outside, and that's actually where the pad will ride along. It will typically slide on the pin like this on top of the caliper, so it is important that this be cleaned. All you got to do is come in here with the scuffing pad, just kind of clean it up. And again, the goal of this is just to remove the gunk, not necessarily remove any material, because you're going to want it to just slide on this pad freely. We'll go ahead and clean that one up and then clean up the other one. And once these are clean and free of gunk, they can go back on the caliper with the pads once everything's put back together. So now that we have everything put back together on our new caliper, we can go ahead and cut our zip tie off, put the line back on. We'll get around to testing it once we get our front suspension put back together, but I think that's pretty much going to be it for this one. And that's all there really is to rebuilding your Wilwood calipers on your Legend car. Now, we should test these out right now, and I suggest that you test yours out as soon as you can. But we're gonna leave ours alone for right now, just because we're still going through the rest of the car and we haven't started putting the front end back together yet. So once we get everything up here, put back together and our bearings checked and all that stuff, and everything kind of slowly coming together, then we'll go ahead and top off our reservoir and go ahead and try and test out these calipers. But until then, we're just gonna let them sit how they are, and we'll wait to top off, and hopefully that they don't fall off of the car and stretch out the brake cable like they did in our last video. Now, in case you missed the last video, all we did was go through all of our suspension bolts and replace them. And I really feel like that's the most important thing when it comes to your off-season maintenance, is to make sure you get every single bolt checked over, and you might as well go ahead and replace them because it's really not that expensive. And then of course, if you're running the Wilwoods, this is obviously one of the most important things to do as well, because those seals tend to get gunked up pretty easily, and with all the track debris that we get here in Colorado, it's pretty easy that they will get clogged up and won't allow the piston to retract into the caliper on its own. So definitely something that we're going to be looking at more often throughout the season next year, but I'm really glad that we went through this, and obviously this was the first time that we've done it. So if you saw anything that we majorly screwed up on, or something, you know, we can make a little bit easier for everyone else, then go ahead and drop your suggestion down in the comments. But like I said, this was just our first time, so hopefully as we continue to do it, we'll get a little bit better at it and find some other ways to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. But as we come to the end of 2023, I think this will wrap up our maintenance for the year. Next video will be something a little bit different, so we're not going to get hands on the car, but obviously when we come back after the new year, we will start working on the car again and hopefully start looking at the rear end, make sure our brakes back there are good, and make sure our rear gear and all of our axles and the seals back there are good. But then once we finish everything back there, we'll obviously need to make sure that everything's still good, and then we can start putting the car back together. And I think we're moving along pretty decently, but you know, only time will tell how we feel. So I think that'll wrap up today's video. I definitely appreciate you guys watching. I hope to catch you in the next one.
Never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray.